My son hid my passport so I couldn't fly back to Ghana for my own mother's funeral. He said he was too busy to drive me to the embassy for a new one. He thought he could trap me, an old woman, in his suburban American house until I was broken enough to sell my family home. He didn't know that the threads of my life were woven into a legacy far richer than he could ever imagine, and that a queen can never truly be held captive by a pawn. Before we begin, I want to say Akwaba. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. If you believe that our roots are our strength and that no ocean is wide enough to sever the bonds of ancestry and dignity, then you have found a place at my table. It warms my spirit to see where you are all listening from, so please share in the comments. Now find a comfortable seat and let me tell you the story of how my own son tried to cut the threads of my life, forgetting that I was the one who taught him how to weave. My name is Alma Asante. I am 65 years old, and for the past 5 years, my world has been the quiet, manicured suburb of Silver Spring, Maryland. But my soul, my spirit has always remained in my true home, Kumasi, the heart of the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana. I am a Kent cloth weaver, or at least I was. For 40 years, my hands spoke the language of the loom, turning silk threads into stories, weaving patterns that held the wisdom of my ancestors. Here in my son's house, my hands are mostly quiet. I came to America 5 years ago after my husband Joseph walked on to join the ancestors. My son Kofi, my only child, insisted. "Mama, you can't be alone," he'd said over the phone, his voice a mixture of filial duty and a strange American urgency. So I packed up my life, leaving my beautiful, sprawling family home in the care of my sister, and flew across the Atlantic. Kofi's world is very different from mine. He is 45 and works as a loan officer at a bank. He insists everyone, even me sometimes, call him Kevin in public, a name he says is more professional. He is married to Michelle, an American-born woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper ambition. She is an event planner for powerful people in Washington, D.C., and her life is a carefully curated performance of success. They live in a house that is far too big for them, with a mortgage that I know keeps my son awake at night. They are house poor, a phrase I had to learn, drowning in debt to maintain an image of wealth. My presence in this house is a source of constant low-level friction. My very being is an unwelcome reminder of the world Kofi is so desperate to escape. The scent of groundnut soup and shito from my cooking clashes with the bland, sterile smell of Michelle's scented candles. The sound of me speaking Twi on the phone to my sister is met with tight, polite smiles. They see my traditional clothes, my faith, my stories of our family, not as a rich heritage but as an embarrassment. I am the old country mother, a relic they must tolerate. I have tried to be small, to be quiet, to not take up too much space in their big empty house. I have learned that in America, an elder is not a source of wisdom but often a burden. The call came on a Tuesday morning. The sky outside was a flat, Maryland gray. I was in the kitchen preparing to make banku, when my phone rang with the familiar tone I had set for my sister, Ya in Kumasi. Her voice, when she spoke, was thick with a grief so profound I felt it across the thousands of miles of ocean between us. "Amma," she wept. "She is gone. Mama has walked on." The world tilted. My mother, the matriarch of our family, the keeper of our stories, the custodian of the ancestral weaving looms that had been passed down from mother to daughter for generations. She was gone. A pain, sharp and absolute, pierced my heart. The kitchen in Silver Spring faded away, and I was back in our family compound in Kumasi, surrounded by the scent of hibiscus and the sound of my mother's laughter. Through my own tears I knew what I had to do. As the eldest daughter, my duty was clear. Ashanti tradition is not a suggestion. It is a sacred obligation. I had to go home. I had to be there to help wash her body, to greet the mourners, to sit vigil, to pour libation. The funeral is not just an ending. It is a beginning. It is the time when the spirit is sent on its journey with honor. It is the time when the family gathers to reaffirm its bonds. And for me, it was the time when the matriarchal legacy, the sacred duty of our family's weaving tradition, was to be formally passed to me. "I am coming, yeah," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I will be on the next flight I can find." After the call ended, I moved with a sudden, desperate purpose. I went to my bedroom, to the small locked chest where I kept my important documents. My Ghanaian passport. My connection to my home, my identity. I unlocked the chest. My husband's old letters were there. My birth certificate was there. But the small dark green booklet with the golden Adinkra symbol on the front was gone. My passport was missing. I emptied the chest, my hands trembling. I searched my drawers, my closet, under the bed. A cold, sick feeling began to creep into my heart. I had not touched that passport since I had shown it to Kofi to make a copy for his records when I first arrived. I kept it locked away. There was only one other person who had a key to my room for emergencies. My son. I went downstairs, my heart pounding. Kofi and Michelle were in the living room, their faces arranged in masks of solemn concern. "Mama, we heard you on the phone," Kofi said, his voice soft. "We are so sorry for your loss." "My passport," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I cannot find it." "Oh no," Michelle said, her eyes wide with false sympathy. "Are you sure? Where did you last see it?" "I keep it locked in my chest," I said, my eyes fixed on my son. "It is gone." "Well, we'll help you look," Kofi said, standing up. "It must be around here somewhere. Don't you worry, Mama. We'll find it." But I knew as I looked into his eyes and saw the flicker of something cold and calculating behind the performance of concern, that they would not find it. Because he was the one who had taken it. And I was suddenly, terrifyingly, a prisoner. The days that followed were a special kind of cruelty, a performance of sympathy layered over a cage of deceit. Kofi and Michelle helped me search for my passport with a great show of diligence. They turned my room upside down, their faces etched with concern, all while knowing exactly where my passport was. Hidden away in some dark corner of the house, a key to a prison of their own making. "Are you sure you didn't put it in a different drawer, Mama?" Kofi would ask, his voice full of gentle, patronizing concern. "Sometimes you forget things. Maybe you left it in a coat pocket?" Michelle would suggest, her tone implying that I was a dotty, careless old woman. Each suggestion was a small, sharp jab, designed to make me doubt my own mind, to make me feel helpless and dependent on them. But my mind was clear. I knew I had not misplaced it. And as the days ticked by, their motive became brutally, painfully obvious. The calls from my sister in Kumasi became more frantic. "Amma, the elders are asking for you. The funeral arrangements must be made. When are you coming?" Each call was a fresh wave of agony. I was the eldest daughter. My absence was not just a personal sorrow. It was a profound cultural failure, a source of shame for my family. I was failing my mother in her final journey. After 3 days of their charade, I confronted them. "I know you have it, Kofi," I said, my voice low and steady. "I know you took my passport. Why are you doing this to me?" The mask of concern finally dropped. Kofi sighed, a long, weary sound of a man burdened by his own mother. "Mama, be reasonable," he said, his voice taking on a hard, impatient edge. "Flying to Ghana is expensive. The funeral costs. You can't afford it." "I have my own savings," I retorted. "And it is my duty to be there. It is not about money." This was when Michelle stepped in, the true architect of this cruel strategy. She sat down, her expression one of cool, calculated reason. "Amma," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Let's be practical. You have that big, beautiful house in Kumasi just sitting there empty. Kofi and we're struggling. The mortgage on this house, the car payments. We're drowning. That house is my home," I said. "It is our family home." "It's an asset," Michelle corrected me. "A valuable asset that is just sitting there doing nothing. If you sell it, you could solve all our problems. You could give us the capital we need to get ahead. You could live here with us, comfortably, with no more worries." So that was it. The price of my freedom was my home. They wanted to strip me of my last connection to Ghana, to make me completely dependent on them, a permanent resident in their suburban prison. They were holding my grief hostage, waiting for me to break. But I was not broken yet. I was a weaver. I knew how to find a single strong thread in a tangled mess. "There is another way," I said, my voice firm. "I do not need my passport. As a Ghanaian citizen, I can get an emergency travel document from the embassy in Washington. It is only a short drive. You will take me there tomorrow." The look on their faces was one of pure, venomous frustration. I had found a flaw in their plan. They had not counted on my knowledge of my own rights. Kofi looked at Michelle, a silent, panicked conversation passing between them. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. He turned back to me, his face setting into a mask of stubborn refusal. "I can't, Mama," he said, the words clipped and cold. "I'm too busy at work this week. It's the end of the quarter. I can't possibly take a day off to drive you into DC and wait around at an embassy. It would only take a few hours," I pleaded, the desperation rising in my throat. "Kofi, please. This is my mother. And this is my job," he snapped, his voice rising. "My job that pays for this house you live in, for the food you eat. I can't just drop everything for you. We'll figure it out next week." "Next week will be too late," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "The funeral is in 4 days." "Then I guess you're not going," he said, the words delivered with a chilling finality. He turned and walked out of the room, Michelle following him, her face a mask of cold, triumphant victory. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just that he had hidden my passport. It was that he was now actively, openly refusing to help me. He was using his busyness, his American life, as a weapon to enforce my imprisonment. He was choosing his job, his house, his wife, over his own mother's sacred duty to her own mother. I stood alone in the quiet, sterile living room, the silence pressing in on me. The last flicker of hope had been extinguished. I was trapped. My mother would be buried without her eldest daughter by her side. My spirit cried out, a silent, keening wail of a grief so profound it felt like a physical death. They had done it. They had broken me. Or so they believed. They did not know that in the heart of an Ashanti weaver, when all other threads are cut, there is always one left. The thread of our ancestors. The thread of our craft. And with that single thread, a new pattern could always be woven. The days that followed were a blur of suffocating grief. I missed my mother's funeral. The phone calls from my sister, were filled with the sounds of drumming, of wailing, of the sacred rites I was supposed to be a part of. I would sit in my room in Silver Spring, the phone pressed to my ear, and weep in silence, a ghost at my own family's mourning. I felt a shame so deep it settled in my bones. I had failed my mother. I had failed my ancestors. My son and his wife treated me with a cloying, suffocating kindness that was more painful than their cruelty. They brought me trays of food I couldn't eat. They spoke to me in hushed, gentle tones, as if I were a fragile piece of glass that might shatter. They were waiting for the weight of my grief and isolation to crush me, to make me surrender and sign the papers to sell my home. But in the depths of my sorrow I found a lifeline. It was the one piece of home I had brought with me, the one piece of my identity they could not take away. In the corner of my closet was a small portable loom and a bag filled with spools of vibrant silk thread. My hands, which had been idle and aching for 5 years, remembered their purpose. I set up the loom in my small bedroom. The familiar rhythmic sounds of the heddles rising and falling, the shuttle passing back and forth, became a prayer. The silence of the house was filled with the quiet, steady music of my craft. I was not just weaving cloth, I was weaving my grief. I was weaving my memories of my mother. I was weaving my connection to the generations of Ashanti women who had sat at looms just like this one, turning their sorrow and their joy into art. I decided to weave the most difficult, most sacred pattern I knew. It was a pattern my mother had taught me, one known only to a few master weavers in our family. It was called Nyansapo, the wisdom knot. It is a symbol that means a wise person has the capacity to choose the best means to attain a goal. It represents wisdom, ingenuity, and patience. The pattern is incredibly complex, a dizzying interplay of geometric shapes and symbolic colors, each thread carrying a piece of our history, our proverbs, our beliefs. Weaving the Nyansapo was a slow, meditative act. Each thread passed through my fingers was a memory. The deep gold was my mother's laughter. The royal blue was the wisdom in her eyes. The vibrant green was the lush earth of our home in Kumasi. The crimson red was the strength of our ancestral bloodline. My hands moved with a muscle memory that was deeper than thought. I was not just creating a pattern. I was communing with my mother's spirit. I was performing her funeral rites in the only way I could, with the language of thread. My only respite from the prison of my son's house was my weekly visit to the Ghanaian Presbyterian Church in Silver Spring. It was a small, vibrant community, a little piece of home in this foreign land. I had a friend there, a respected elder named Sister Akua. She was a woman of immense faith and quiet strength, and she was the only person I could confide in. One Sunday after the service, I sat with her in the fellowship hall, the scent of fried plantain and jollof rice in the air. I told her everything. I told her about the missing passport, about Kofi's refusal to take me to the embassy, about the pressure to sell my home. My voice was quiet, but my story was heavy with the weight of my shame and sorrow. Sister Akua listened, her face growing harder and more resolute with every word. She did not offer empty platitudes. She offered a righteous, holy anger on my behalf. "This is a sin, Alma," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "What your son is doing is a sin against you, against his grandmother, and against the ancestors. This will not stand." The following week I brought a small piece of my weaving to the church to show her. It was a section of the Nyansapo pattern, the intricate wisdom knot glowing in gold and crimson. Sister Akua took the cloth in her hands, her eyes widening in awe. She was a woman who knew our culture, who understood the deep significance of our traditions. "Alma," she breathed, tracing the complex pattern with her finger. "This is not just weaving. This is high art. This is the work of a master. The Nyansapo. I have not seen it woven with such skill since I was a girl. Your mother. She was the keeper of this pattern, was she not?" "She was," I whispered. "And she taught me." "And you are the heir," Sister Akua said, her eyes locking onto mine with a new, fierce intensity. "You are not just a grieving daughter, Alma. You are a queen without her throne. Your son does not know who he is holding captive. He does not know the power you hold in these two hands." She folded the piece of Kent cloth with a reverence usually reserved for a holy book. "We must do something," she said, her voice full of a new, steely purpose. "The community must be told. The embassy must be told. They are not just keeping a woman from her mother's funeral. They are holding a living cultural treasure of Ghana hostage. And that is a crime that cannot be allowed to stand." In that moment, sitting in the humble fellowship hall of our small church, a new thread had been introduced into the pattern of my life. It was the thread of hope. A thread of righteous anger. A thread of community. My son and his wife thought they had unraveled me. They had no idea that Sister Akua and I were about to weave a net that would ensnare them both. Sister Akua was a woman of formidable action. She did not waste time with gossip or idle complaints. She moved with the strategic grace of an Ashanti queen mother, marshaling her resources and connections with a quiet, unshakable purpose. Her first call was not to a lawyer or a social worker, but to a man she knew from her days in Accra, a man who now held a respectable position as a community liaison within the Ghanaian embassy in Washington, D.C. She spoke to him not as a gossiping church member, but as a concerned elder of the Ghanaian diaspora. She laid out the situation with dignified gravity. She spoke of a respected elder, a master weaver from a distinguished family in Kumasi, who was being cruelly prevented from returning home to mourn her own mother. She described the emotional distress, the cultural violation. She painted a picture of a vulnerable woman being exploited by her own family. She did not have to embellish. The simple, unadorned truth was damning enough. The man at the embassy was horrified and promised to look into the matter immediately. A file was opened. My name, Alma Asante, was now on the radar of the Ghanaian government in America. At the very same time, a different set of threads was being woven across the Atlantic, threads I knew nothing about. In the high-stakes world of international art and ethnographic collection, the death of my mother was not just a family tragedy. It was a significant cultural event. She was known in those circles as the custodian of the legendary Nyansapo weaving tradition. Her passing created a vacuum, a question mark. Who was the heir? Who now held the knowledge of that priceless sacred pattern? Frantic inquiries began to fly from European art brokers who had lucrative relationships with my family, from curators at world-renowned museums with Ashanti collections, and most importantly from the office of the cultural attaché to the Asantehene, the king of the Ashanti people. The royal court took the preservation of Kent traditions with the utmost seriousness. The Nyansapo was not just a pattern, it was a piece of their royal intellectual heritage. All these inquiries from London, from Paris, from Kumasi, were all directed to one place, the office of the Ghanaian Cultural Attaché in Washington, D.C. They all asked the same question. Where is Alma Asante? The daughter. The heir. We need to find her. And so, within the stately walls of the embassy, two seemingly unrelated streams of information began to flow towards each other. One was a compassionate query about a distressed elderly woman named Alma Asante, being held against her will in a suburban house in Maryland. The other was a high-priority international search for a master weaver, a living cultural treasure, also named Ama Asante, believed to be residing somewhere in the DC area. It did not take long for someone to connect the dots. A sharp-eyed junior diplomat, tasked with cross-referencing the files, saw my name and the mention of my mother's recent passing in both reports. He saw the description of me as a master weaver from the church elder's report. He saw the urgent requests for my whereabouts from the highest levels of the art and cultural world. He took the files to his superior. The superior took them to the cultural attaché. The cultural attaché, his eyes wide with the gravity of the situation, walked them directly into the office of the ambassador himself. The picture was suddenly shockingly clear. The woman they had been searching for, this priceless cultural asset, was not just missing. She was a victim. She was being held captive, her rights violated, her cultural duties obstructed by her own son. For the Ghanaian government, this was no longer a simple family dispute. It was an international incident, a matter of national pride and cultural heritage. The honor of Ghana was at stake. While all of this was unfolding in the corridors of power, I was in my quiet prison in Silver Spring, weaving my grief into threads of silk. Kofi and Michelle, oblivious to the storm gathering around them, saw only a grieving, weakening old woman. They saw my quietness as surrender. They believed their plan was working perfectly. They thought they had successfully isolated me, that they had cut every thread connecting me to my home, to my power. They had no idea that the threads of my life were far longer and stronger than they could ever comprehend. They had no idea that the quiet elder from their church, the stuffy diplomats in Washington, the powerful art collectors in Europe, and the King's Court in Kumasi were all at that very moment, being woven together into a new pattern. A pattern of my deliverance. A pattern of their reckoning. The pressure from Kofi and Michelle intensified. My quiet grief, my retreat into my weaving, was not seen as a process of mourning, but as a sign of my surrender. They believed they had broken me. They thought it was time to close the deal. They began to leave the real estate documents for the Kumasi house on the kitchen table, a constant, silent presence. They would talk about the sale in front of me, their voices full of a false, cheerful optimism. "The market in Kumasi is hot right now, Mama," Kofi would say, looking at a printout from a Ghanaian real estate website. "We could get a great price. Enough to pay off this house, get out of debt, and have plenty left over for your care. Think of it, Alma," Michelle would add, her voice smooth and persuasive. "No more worries for any of us. Just a comfortable, secure life here in America. There's nothing left for you in Ghana now anyway. It's time to let go of the past and look to the future." Her words were like acid on my soul. Let go of the past. Let go of my home, my ancestors, my mother's grave. They saw my entire life, my entire heritage as a simple real estate transaction, a problem to be solved with a signature. One afternoon they cornered me in the living room. Kofi held a pen and a sheaf of papers. "Mama, let's just do this now," he said, his voice taking on a hard, impatient edge. "It's time. Let's just sign the papers and get it over with." I looked at the pen in his hand, the pen he wanted me to use to sign away my entire world. I looked at my son's face, a face I no longer recognized, a face twisted with a greedy, desperate urgency. I opened my mouth to refuse, to unleash the torrent of anger and grief I had held inside for weeks. But before I could speak, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the front door. We all froze. They weren't expecting anyone. Kofi, annoyed by the interruption, went to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch of their suburban Maryland home was a man who did not belong there. He was a tall, elegant Ghanaian man in a beautifully tailored dark suit. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a long, black sedan with a small Ghanaian flag on the fender and diplomatic plates. The man was His Excellency Ambassador Michael Osei, the Ghanaian ambassador to the United States. He did not look at Kofi. His eyes scanned the room and found me sitting on the sofa. A warm, respectful smile lit up his face. He bypassed my stunned son completely, walked into the living room and approached me. He stopped a few feet away and gave a slight, formal bow. "Mama Ama Asante," he said, his voice a deep, rich baritone that filled the room with an authority that was absolute. He addressed me not as a simple Mrs., but with the honorifics due to a respected elder and master of a great craft. "It is a profound honor to meet you. I am Ambassador Michael Osei. I have come on behalf of the government of Ghana, and on behalf of the Asantehene himself. Kofi and Michelle could only stare, their mouths slightly agape. Their world, with its carefully constructed hierarchy where they were the powerful adults and I was the helpless dependent, had just been turned completely upside down. Your mother's passing is a great loss, not just for your family but for our entire nation, the ambassador continued, his voice full of a genuine, dignified sympathy that shamed the shallow condolences of my son. Her contribution to our cultural heritage was immeasurable. He then turned his gaze for the first time to Kofi and Michelle. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a look of cold, official disapproval. We at the embassy were deeply distressed to learn that you were having difficulties with your travel documents, Mama Alma, he said, his eyes still locked on me, but his words a clear indictment of them. An administrative oversight of that magnitude at such a critical time is unacceptable. I am here to personally rectify the situation. He gestured to an aide who had followed him in, a young woman carrying a leather portfolio. We have prepared an emergency travel document for you, and I am here to personally escort you to the embassy. There are several international parties who are extremely anxious to speak with you about the continuation of your family's artistic legacy. Your nation needs you, Mama Alma. Your presence is required at home. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to the fragile reality Kofi and Michelle had built. International parties. Artistic legacy. Your nation needs you. They were staring at me, at the woman they had deemed a worthless old country burden, and seeing her through the ambassador's eyes. They were seeing a queen. I stood up, my back straight, my head held high. The shame and grief that had stooped my shoulders for weeks seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet, powerful dignity I thought I had lost forever. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, I said, my voice clear and steady. I am ready to go home. I walked towards the door, the ambassador by my side. I did not look at my son. I did not look at his wife. I left them standing in the middle of their living room, surrounded by the expensive furniture they couldn't afford, their faces a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. They had tried to trap a sparrow, not knowing she was an eagle. And the eagle was about to fly home. My return to Ghana was not the quiet, shame-faced homecoming of a daughter who had failed her mother. It was the triumphant arrival of a matriarch. The embassy had arranged everything. I flew first class, treated with a deference and respect that was both humbling and deeply validating. When I landed at Kotoka International Airport in Accra, I was met not by my sister alone, but by a delegation that included the cultural attaché and a representative from the office of the Asantehene. They drove me to Kumasi, to my beautiful family home that I had thought I might never see again. Walking through its rooms, filled with the scent of cedar and the memories of my ancestors, was like taking my first full breath after years of suffocation. My sister, and I held each other and wept, our tears a mixture of sorrow for our mother and overwhelming relief for my return. The final funeral rites for my mother were held with all the dignity and tradition she deserved. And I, her eldest daughter, was at the center of it all, performing my duties, pouring the libations, and greeting the endless stream of mourners who came to pay their respects. A week after the funeral, the formal ceremony to transfer the matriarchal legacy took place. In the presence of the family elders and a representative from the royal court, I was formally named the new custodian of the Nyansapo tradition. The ancestral looms, the secret dyeing techniques, the portfolio of lucrative business relationships with international collectors and museums. It was all now mine. It was a legacy of art, culture, and wealth that was far beyond anything Kofi and Michelle, in their narrow materialistic worldview, could have ever conceived. The house they had tried to steal was merely the gatehouse to an empire. Back in Maryland, the world of Kofi and Michelle was imploding. The story of their cruelty, amplified by the dramatic arrival of the ambassador, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit Ghanaian community in the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. It was the main topic of conversation at church services, at community events, at dinner parties. They were not just criticized, they were ostracized. They became social pariahs, a living cautionary tale of what happens when you forsake your family and your culture for American ambition. The scandal inevitably bled into their professional lives. Kofi's bank, a conservative institution that valued reputation, was mortified. They couldn't fire him for a family matter, but they quietly restructured his department, moving him from his client-facing loan officer position to a dead-end compliance role in a windowless office in the basement. His career was over. Michelle's fate was even swifter. As an event planner in the image-conscious world of Washington, D.C., her reputation was everything. The story of her callous treatment of her elderly mother-in-law made her toxic. Her high-powered clients dropped her. Her business, which had been her entire identity, evaporated in a matter of weeks. Without their inflated incomes, they could no longer afford the mortgage on their big, impressive house. The very status symbol they had committed their terrible act to protect was repossessed by the bank. They lost everything. Months later, sitting in my beautiful sun-drenched courtyard in Kumasi, overseeing a shipment of a new Nyansapo Kent cloth destined for a museum in London, my sister brought me a letter. It had arrived from the United States. It was from Kofi. His letter was a pathetic, rambling screed of self-pity and blame. He wrote of his ruin, his shame, his desperation. He begged for my forgiveness. And, of course, he begged for money. I read the letter, my face impassive. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I felt only a great, sad distance. He was a stranger to me now, a ghost from another life. I put the letter aside. I would not be replying. I walked over to my loom, where a new pattern was beginning to take shape. A design of my own creation. The threads were a vibrant mix of gold for wisdom and deep blue, for the ocean I had crossed to reclaim my life. My hands, once quiet and idle, now moved with a renewed strength and purpose. They were the hands of a queen, a matriarch, a weaver of my own destiny. I had my home. I had my legacy. I had my dignity. And that was an inheritance no one could ever steal.